start, and then maybe people outside will realise that they're missing out on what's going on here. Hopefully. And we are running a little bit behind time, and we have 2 sessions to go. One is localization and social networking. The session is going to be introduced by Vincent Prince College Dublin, with 2 speakers from Microsoft. And we have second session then on language technologies and localization is going to be introduced by Andy Way. Again, as you will have noticed yesterday, it is really, really important that we have our lunch break at the time that it is scheduled, and even a little bit earlier if possible, because otherwise the queue that we're going to be in is going to be longer than it was yesterday. So we have to finish at 12:30. So what we thought is that the next coffee break, we'll keep that a little bit shorter, and we will ask just people to get the coffee outside and bring it in here, and we'll just continue with the second session. So we have about 2 hours now of presentations, and I'm really looking forward to those because they're touching on issues that are, I think, in the localization sphere, really new and really exciting. And we got a taste of that in the keynote this morning. So I'm very happy to hand the chair over to Vincent Wade, who's from Trinity College Dublin, and is one of the area leaders of the Centre for Next Generation Localization.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, I'm from Trinity College Dublin, but I'm also working in the Centre for Next Generation Localization as Deputy Director. And what we thought we'd do this morning is to delve a little bit deeper into some of the areas that we're researching in the centre. As Joseph said this morning, we are in the ramp-up stage, but I thought it would be interesting to spend maybe 20 minutes just asking a question about, well, localization. We talked about it yesterday, and again this morning we'll have more presentations on it. But is it part of something slightly bigger, or is it on a continuum with another aspect of the web which is gaining a lot of attention at the moment, specifically in the area of personalisation? So my presentation is going to be about looking at the similarities and looking at places where the two could intersect. And then the second presentation is going to be looking at social networking and looking at localization and social networking area. So I'm looking at the issue of dynamic retrieval and adaptation of multilingual multimedia content. And really trying to ask the question, well, in localization it's focused in on geography, or focused in on if you like, the process of adapting content for a specific region or language by adding locale-specific components or translating text. I also gave a similar definition this morning. I took mine from Wikipedia just to show that we're crowdsourcing and community definitions. What some people don't perhaps realise is what personalisation is. Personalisation began to raise its head on the web probably around about 2000, 2001. And possibly in some people's opinion, personalisation is just sticking the my in front of your domain name. My web, or my this, or my that. And maybe your name pops up in the right-hand corner. Or maybe you're familiar with Amazon and so forth, where, based on what you bought, or based on your profile, they will sell you something. And it's quite interesting that, Minority Report, the film with Tom Cruise and so forth, people suddenly started using that as an example of where personalisation could go in terms of retail. But personalisation is much bigger than that. It's much more deeper than actually trying to change the user experience or the application on particular areas. And if I particularly mention, it's about transforming content, not just retrieving it. An awful lot of people think about personalisation is finding the right bit of content and presenting it. But actually it's not. It's actually about transforming it for that individual user. So we talk about personalisation, really looking at adapting multimedia content and services dynamically to suit an individual's goals or preferences or context of use or prior knowledge. And as we begin to go into personalisation, we realize there are many, many different axes that you can exploit. to make that individual experience for a user. At the moment, probably the biggest bang for the buck into personalisation is prior knowledge and experience. Being able to actually draw on that when you're presenting to an individual, composing content for a particular individual from a corpus of content. We all hate being told over and over things that we already know. We all hate to be confused or put into a position where, I really don't understand this, therefore it's not for me, and you push it away. It's actually getting it at the right level. The environment, because it has to be appropriate for you. Your aims and goals, okay, there's Microsoft people here, but the one frustrating thing that Microsoft is that paperclip man who comes up and tells you, you're trying to write a message to your boss that says, you're trying to write a letter to your aunt. Really frustrating. So actually understanding the goals and aims are important. Having said that, some of the research that was based on is actually world class. In defense of the paper man. So I'm not just slamming it. From language and communication style. For example, so it was a very nice study done in Scotland where they looked at museums. And of course, the big problem with most of museums is getting people in. People don't necessarily think of, oh, it's a nice sunny day, I will go to the museum. So what they did, and particularly for children, so what they did was they actually had created this portal for the museum on the web, but they adapted dynamically the content and the language. In English was different sort of vocabulary for the age group. And what they found was lots of schools were actually virtually doing tours. And of course, once you virtually do a tour in your locale, you will go. And they increased their, if you like, actual physically people coming into their school children coming into their museum, and therefore we're looking at education go. Preferences and culture. I don't have to talk to this community about understanding culture. It's the larger space in which language sits. But also, what people don't always think about is culture, style, and competences. When I first started researching the area of personalisation, I was particularly interested I was having a difficulty in teaching databases in university. One would think that was okay, university students, they would be the same. No, they're not. They're very, very diverse. Particularly when I'm teaching the same course to first year medics, final year computer science, third year engineers. Very different backgrounds, all trying to take a module at the same time. So, having done the course, we do the exit interviews. Each one come in, yeah, it's a great course, but really, you really need to change this part, it's completely wrong, and somebody else comes in, well, that part was the bit I really, really liked. And you kind of go, well, how do I actually sort this out? And you begin to realise that actually it comes down to the personal preferences. Some of it is to do with learning goals and so forth, but some of personal preferences as well. And being able to actually address that at runtime, it can't be done by hand. It's just too slow and too time consuming. If we look at personalisation on the web today, probably the most extensive use in terms of sophistication is probably in technology-enhanced learning. And I'll talk a bit about that later. You do see it in information kiosks and information portals, tourist guides, and since the mobile phone, we've been inundated with location aware, with personalisation being translated into location aware translation. And museums have, and obviously the Amazons and the retail portals for using it for recommendation. It's interesting though that most people think that's the state of the art. That's not the state of the art, that's the state of the market. The state of the art is much further, and we'll talk a little bit about where it is. But I take two very simple examples. Anyone who's been to a university in the last 5 years would know that most of the courses at this stage have online components, and my course is just the same. That's just a screenshot from WebCT Blackboard. Perfectly normal. Not everything is adaptive, but when I go into the SQL adaptive course, I have different ways in which I allow the users to personalize. For example, in this particular one, I just ask them their confidence level of different aspects of the subject they're about to take online. This isn't a pre-test in such they don't feel they're being tested. This is about their confidence and their commitment. One of the huge missing parts that people don't realize about personalization is that the user wants to be part of it too. The worst thing you can do in personalisation is try and be the brain at the back and the all-knowing God, because that actually really gets people going mad. So what we do tend to is we offer explicit and implicit, from a technology perspective, user modeling. From a user's perspective, they have ways of controlling personalisation, and we have other ways of controlling it as well. It can be quite deep. This is a Honeymoon First questionnaire, where we actually begin to identify your learning style. Different people in education either believe or don't believe in learning styles. We found it actually very useful as a reflective approach when we're using technology as learning to be able to show them how they learn and be aware of the different ways of learning. What tends to happen is the course never existed until you log in and until you begin to give some of your information. Because then we generate it on the fly. And the user at any stage can go back and either reconfigure it and rebuild the course, or as we've learned more about him via the interactions, in this case it's a learning course, we can then offer to rebuild it for them to be more appropriate. So again, it's the implicit and the explicit. The other thing, of course, is that it's not just about content, it's also about service. And you want to change, and you want to amend, adapt services as well. But for this particular presentation, we'll focus more on the content. We have students been doing personalisation, allowing students to learn SQL, this particular example, online since about 1997. And it's been personalised or dynamically personalised since about 2001. And we've had 6-7 years of students using this. But they want to access from different devices. So again, the same content base can actually, it will be apps dynamically generated on your, in this case it was a PDA. And anyone who knows or views any of those PDAs handheld devices, the way you navigate is totally different. The way you offer your menus and so forth is totally different. So in personalisation, we're able to handle that. This is one which we worked on with University of Graz in Austria. This one was, it's teaching physics. Not really interested in telling you about physics at this stage. Really just pointing out, this one didn't have an explicit control. This was purely implicit. As the user wandered, and as we identified that they knew certain things or had been exposed to certain things, we then would allow the more content to become available. Again, it's a way of not overloading a user and allowing it to grow. Particularly useful in a kind of auto-discovery, informal learning environment. And this is another one which we did with Intel. I don't know if anyone's heard of the School.ie initiative, which they developed a lot of school content. And we worked with Intel a couple of years ago in showing them how we could take their content and make it personalizable. Again, using the same sorts of technology. This was secondary school magnetism course. And it took us about approximately less than a week, and it was then generating personalized courses. Interesting part of this, probably not that related to anyone in this community, but there needs to be 2 levels of personalization. One was for the student, because they were school kids, but one was for the teachers who wanted to control the amount of adaptivity the students could have, because there was some subjects they didn't want them to get on. So again, it can be really quite sophisticated rather than just recommending you a book. Why? Well, one size doesn't fit all. In fact, we say one size fits one. We have different languages, cultural sensitivities, information needs, likes, preferences, skills. We're in different locations, using different devices with different connectivity, in different circumstances, using different services for different reasons. A whole lot of differences there that we wrap up in one UI. So, to give a proper definition of personalization, then really it's to achieve a most effective, efficient, and satisfying user experience by offering content, activities, and collaboration adapted for the specific needs and influenced by the specific preferences and context for an individual, based on sound presentational strategy. A bit more of a mouthful. Personalization is easier to say. So what about personalisation? And please excuse the 5 minutes I've spent explaining it, but a lot of times when you talk about personalisation, it tends to be just what someone's experienced. I just want to give you the broader picture. But now let's talk about where we are in terms of its relation to localisation. We tend to think of localisation as being geographic-based or population-speaking language-based. We think of personalisation as being very much individual-based or community-based. From localisation, we tend to think in terms of language and national cultural conventions. Whereas personalisation, we have goals, context, preferences, prior experience, prior competencies, and so forth. So it's a much finer grained, and we can think of localisation being coarse-grained to personalisation being finer-grained on some form of continuum. However, that's not the only way some people think of it. Some people also think of it in terms of as a hierarchy. We have adaptivity at the top, and we can have adaptivity to an individual, that's called personalisation, or a community, or adaptivity to particular devices, particular computing, in this case, mobile device community has gone particularly like this particular approach. And we can think then of language-based personalisation as being a subset of personalisation. Again, that might not sit very well with this community, but one can see that actually these two communities, because they have very separate research histories, do need to begin to think in terms of how can we interact and do this better. And within organisation, I'm saying this exactly to the adaptive media community and the adaptive web community, that you really need to begin to talk to the language people and the localisation people, because there's a lot of similarities in terms of as we go forward to next generation. So, just to introduce the kind of three we label them as generic types of next generation multilingual personalisation and localisation. We talk about the bulk localisation, which is probably very little personalisation, but very high volume, and maybe mission critical in places. Information or informative portals, these are very much trying to fill or satisfy a user's need, information need, access need, or whatever. Generally speaking, here there's much higher personalisation, but there's probably lower volume. You're probably only putting some pieces of the corpus together for them at runtime. And then there's looking at the collaborative social networking. Here we have high personalisation, but we've got a lot of user-generated content. I'm not going to talk too much on that at this stage because of time, and I know the next speakers are going to talk a little bit about communities. But just to say that actually, a lot of the communities tend to be defined as this language or this language or this language for that particular Facebook or that particular Bebo, whatever. Really what we'd like to do is break down those language barriers so that somebody else sees your site in their language, in their culture. Because that breaks the wall. And that's the next generation for community sites. I have to put this picture in because it's just us. But you can see that basically there is a queue and we are kind of going off into the distance. So what are the key research goals? We need to improve the retrieval, the accuracy and impact of our content to an individual. So that means we've got to actually look. We know users don't generate good queries. And one could argue that Google actually taught us to generate poor queries, because what happens is we type in 3 words, we don't see what we want, it's our fault when we type another one. It's never the query engine's fault. On the other hand, anyone who's ever used Google or other search engines will say, well actually I do still find what I want, within the first top 10. So this is kind of a balance of, well maybe we can enhance the query dynamically for a user because we know their context or we know more about it. We've got to enable reasoning of the content itself. It's simply not possible to, by hand to mark up metadata to describe content. However, it's not going to be possible to automatically generate the metadata. So we're going to need a hybrid approach. We're going to need an approach which actually does analysis of the content, but also leverages what Tim Berners-Lee defines as the tail of the web. When he invented the web, said something earlier, one of the points was a famous but embarrassing situation was that his original paper on the web got rejected in an academic conference. And it was rejected based on the fact that really there was nothing new here. And I think in another presentation, I think I saw him say something, well, it wasn't that well written anyway, but his point was it doesn't matter, it wouldn't be new if it was on a desktop or on even in an enterprise. It's the fact that it was global that would be the real power. And as we go forward into the web now, we see that's actually it. The real power in the web is not the software, it's the eyeballs on the software. The eyeballs looking at the screens. And as you see, so Web 2.0 is all about leveraging that. We saw a very good presentation from Facebook this morning about how, in fact, they're actually turning their community of normal users into translations and leveraging that. We've seen a number of other companies beginning to do that as well. We'd like to also enable the composition of the content. So it's not just a question of retrieving the content and giving you the documents as in classic IR, information retrieval, but actually composing it into something that's more meaningful and more appropriate. And that is another thing. Enhancing the user's experience and cognitive comprehension and application means really trying to look at how we adapt those particular presentations and the narratives across them. And then from our perspective in CNGL, provide evidence-based research to prove the impact of this sort of technology in different areas. And it will be packaged in different ways in different areas. But the idea is that the framework of technology, services, and solutions could be uniform. In terms of digital content research, what we're looking at in the centre, we're looking at query adaptation, personalisation of multilingual text and speech queries. From a content perspective, we're looking at automatic reasoning over the content, the generation of ontologies, the generation of context for the user, a difficult thing to do. And then look at how we actually might be able to automate the slicing, because we know the coarser the grain of the content, the harder it is to personalise. And right-sizing that is very difficult because it really depends on your usage and how deep personalisation you want to go. The last part is dynamic personalised composition. How we can put pieces together in strategies that really suit the particular user's need. Whether it be informative, whether it be explanative, help and so forth. And can really change the user's relationship with a particular online corpus or company. Take an example, let's imagine Mary. And Mary is a question about Hercules. So everyone's thinking Greek gods. In fact, Mary's in second year, in K-12, age 10 to 12, and she's actually doing a project on stars, and it's education. With that sort of context, we can actually go and harvest content for her. In this case, it's an example of an open corpus. We can harvest content for her, or we can go through caches of content that we might have in particular areas of education if we don't have the curriculum. We can also generate some higher level ontologies about those areas so we can reason better about it. And maybe with that sort of information we can adapt the query. So instead of just saying Hercules and hit return, we can actually provide more focused queries to be able to gather content that we think might be more appropriate for them. What we can then do then is begin to reason about that content and decide what's the best way of actually presenting this so that she can make more sense of it. And then present it. But of course, this is just like any use of a search engine moving forward into this kind of portal idea. We're actually looking at the dialogue from the user through this. So this is under the user's control and can constrain certain things in certain ways and use a dashboard to be able to control it. And it becomes a much more useful, empowering solution than just the original search engine. If you do this sort of research, you begin to really identify very quickly that we're actually passing different areas. The first one is information retrieval. However, we're also looking at adaptive web, looking at content indexing, control vocabularies, ontologies, adaptive navigation and presentation, which is my area of research. But if we're doing multilingual, we also have the issue of translation, text analytics, and so forth. And really in CNGL, in terms of the digital content research, we're kind of focusing on the core parts of that where they overlap, so that we can actually empower next generation. Let's go back to this and see what we really mean then. So we're talking about being able to generate metadata for content and be able to use crowdsourcing to actually add content and provide some quality control. We're actually being able to capture context for users. Now, context can be from very simple context because we've only got an occasional user, to actually really quite deep context because this is somebody who's actually registered with the site, we know more about them, and we can actually reason more easily about it. We've got to look at technology to be able to analyze content and be able to reason about different strategies about how it can be put together. Whether it be presentational strategies, whether it be terminal strategies, as in strategies associated with a particular interface that that user wants, whether it's voice, whether it be mobile, and so forth. And be able to actually put the technologies around that in a flexible framework with obviously service-based, but it can be composed in a way that suits the particular, in this case, informative portal offering. So what might that look like? Well, we're currently researching, and we have some experiments going on at the moment. We expect to be able to publish some results for next March. But one considered having sets of models, user models, context models, and some upper ontologies and lower ontologies. Sets of metadata describing content. And again, how much metadata and the accuracy of that metadata is one of the things we want to research. There is this notional idea that the metadata has to be really accurate. We've actually found it doesn't have to be that accurate because of the level of adaptivity you're providing. A little bit of adaptivity goes a long way, we found, in user trials. And then the services themselves. We want to be able to pull in services as needed. This is the translation services and the appropriate. I mean, Yusuf mentioned this morning, and I'm sure Andy will pick it up when it comes to translations. There's different sorts of non-functional requirements around them. There's different sorts of performances, and therefore you've got to have different expectations in terms of quality, in terms of what you're in. And the adaptive port itself, which actually looks at the strategy and provides it to that particular user. So I'm trying to keep in time, so I'm just finishing now. So what I wanted to do today in the first presentation is really just kind of, if you hadn't been aware of it all, the idea of personalisation and where it's actually going at the moment, and where it's actually built into product at the moment in terms of state of the art. But to point out that really the localization research and know-how has not actually impacted on it, and it really has a lot to contribute. The language and text analytics area of research hasn't really got involved in it either, and really it's you know, in terms of the centre, it's been fascinating because we've used the same vocabulary, but we mean completely different things. You know, when we talk to people from text analytics and talk to people from translation, you know, we banned the word ontology for at least 6 months, because it meant things different to or controlled vocabularies and so forth. So, you know, there is an actual meeting of different researchers and different research backgrounds in here, and we think it's very important. We think it's going to be very important to the localization industry moving forward. But we're going to need all of these to different degrees as we move forward for next generation information systems. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't know about you, but my head was spinning from stage there. I have lots of because if you look at the localization industry, you didn't mention the word locale. But you know, there is an assumption there that the systems make about who you are and where you are and what you do and what language you speak. And as we all know, because most of us here are not native English speakers, and they live probably communicate in English or whatever language in different places of the world. You know, those assumptions usually don't work. So the ideas that you have there are certainly very, very interesting, very, very valid to be taken off or on. I'm afraid we won't take any questions, in fact, but we will go on straight to the next two presenters. And thank you again